Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Brendan Housler with EVOQ Bike. We've got a great podcast today with Lindsey from Pinnacle Performance, all the way in Australia. Shout out to Dylan. Thanks so much for your time and coming on the podcast where we talk about coach-athlete relationship, load management, and power testing, and a bunch of other things that they're doing at their sports performance center down in Melbourne. A few of you, a few hundred actually, of you heard this podcast about a month ago when the audio version was accidentally released. And I want to take a quick second to talk about some things in the podcast moving forward in the difference that we're going to see between interviews and conversations, where Dylan had reached out to me to have this conversation together. And when I posted the podcast, someone responded to me, hey, you're talking way too much in this podcast. You're supposed to be interviewing and asking him questions and not responding. And I, at first, was a little defensive about this, I'll be honest. These are just conversations that I enjoy having with other athletes, coaches, whomever. And I do admit that I've looked back at old podcasts and I get so excited, and I'm excited to talk to these athletes, just as you're probably excited to hear from them. And maybe I'm not the best podcaster, and this is something that I'm learning along the way. I don't have a journalism background. This is not my profession by, trade or however you want to call it. But there are definitely times where I add anecdotes after an athlete or coach speaks that I shouldn't add, and I'm learning that. However, and I think that's more of an interview, right? But I still don't want an interview just to be a drilling of questions, because some of these athletes, when we say cut, they say, hey man, this was a great conversation. So there will be less of that. I'm taking to heart the feedback that I'm getting from a few of you out there. And then I'm also listening to guys like Swain Tuft who says, hey man, don't listen to the comments, just keep doing what you're doing. But I could always get better. This is not my forte. I'm learning as I go. I just love cycling and want to share what these athletes have to say and kind of what I have to say, in the same manner. But I think there is a difference here, an interview versus a conversation. So this upcoming one with Dylan is more of a conversation. We go back and forth, and maybe I did add some anecdotes that I shouldn't add. I will be cognizant of that. But I'm always open to constructive feedback. I'm always open to constructive criticism. The only thing I ask is that if you're nice about it, I will respond and I will take it to heart. Some of you just try to bash me in the comments, and those I just got to let slide, and I'm not going to reply to you. So anywho, off the soapbox, but I want to let you know where the podcast is going. Maybe I'll start labeling them more of an interview, more of a conversation. Because sometimes if I talk to like Landry Bobo, we're just going to chop it up. You're going to hear my voice. And if you don't want to hear what I have to say on a topic, maybe that's not the right episode for you. So anyways, I digress. Good luck with your training and racing. Hope you enjoy this episode. Hope you get something from it, most importantly, so that you get faster, stronger, crush it. Let's go. Introduce yourself to the people. Who are you? Where do you work? Where are you from? All that quick stuff.
Yeah. So Dylan Lindsey. I am just underneath Melbourne at the moment. So in Mornington Peninsula, we sort of set up shop just down here at a high performance centre. For anyone who used to watch the Herald Sun Tour, where it raced up Arthur's Seat, we're right at the base there. And I started a coaching company called Pinnacle Performance. I suppose most commonly known or most famously known for coaching Sarah Giganti, but we coach heaps of really cool people across the board. Sort of had that business for 6 years or so after coming out of uni at Federation University in Ballarat, doing a degree in sports science.
Awesome. That's great. Man, so stoked you're here. Hey, somebody was actually just mentioning to me I'm a master's guy. I'm still trying to do some P1 stuff, but he's also 40 plus, and Gran Fondo Worlds is in Australia in 2025. Is Victoria near you, or where is that?
Yep. Yeah, I'm in Victoria. That's the state I live in. So,
okay.
The course, do you know what town the course is in?
I don't. I quickly looked, and I don't know if you know Owen Schott. He's been on the podcast a couple times before, and we went to Toulouse in 2018 in France together. And so we were doing a podcast the other day and said, man, Australia. And I did Tour Southland in New Zealand, obviously not Australia, 2019 maybe. And I need to get back down to that part of the world. And that would be a great reason to go race some people my age and mix it up. So I got to find the course, but yeah, would love to get down there. I just see so many cool things about Australia. It's just so far.
Yeah, well, I actually turned 30 this year as well, so we might be competing against each other potentially.
I'm 42, so I got you beat. You'll be in a different age category. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna look that up. But if we do cross paths, I'll definitely be hitting you up.
Absolutely.
And there's a few other people down that way. So, well, I appreciate you reaching out with some ideas of things to talk about. I definitely want to talk about Sarah, and you had some really good topics about testing and load monitoring and coach-athlete relationship, which we didn't really chat about in email. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. I think those are three great topics. Which way do you want to go? What do you want to start with?
Dealer's choice. I'm happy to touch base on anything. It's probably not a bad one to start with, a bit of coach-athlete relationship. It's a nice and easy thing to kick into.
Okay. What do you think are, either way, like, what do you think, since there's obviously a lot of athletes that listen to this that might not understand, they don't understand coaching. I get people, when I had mentioned to people that I have a coach, they said, well, you get workouts from this guy? And that blew my mind when someone said this. I was like, wow, they just must not have had a good coach or have never had a coach. What do you think are some of the aspects of a coach-athlete relationship that people might be missing out on, that they just don't understand happen, or another area of just the relationship that kind of comes to mind when you think of this topic?
Yeah, okay. So I suppose like a bit of an analogy for what I think a good coach-athlete relationship is, the athlete is in the driver's seat, they're driving the car, and then the coach is in the passenger seat, and their role in the passenger seat is number one, giving directions and guiding the map, and number two, setting the good tones and setting the good vibes with the DJ. So what that means is the athlete comes to us with a goal of what they want to achieve on the bike, and we've got to number one, provide training modalities that are appropriate to get sort of towards their goals, but we've got to do that in a way that's sort of receptive to their values as a person, and like keep it fun. And I suppose fun to what they consider is fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is a great analogy. I love that analogy more. I usually tell people, you're the boss, you are the CEO. I've sort of stolen this from Jim Miller from USA Cycling, and I'm just a hired consultant. You make the decisions at the end of the day. And one of my coaches said to me one time, what I put down on the training calendar is my best guess from when we put that stuff in there. Obviously, we can change things within the week, but don't just stare at training peaks, because you might wake up and feel terrible, and you probably shouldn't go do that VO2 max workout. Let's move that. And so I just think the aspect of communication, as you being the map holder and, hey, go this way, the communication of the vibe you're setting as the DJ is so important. And that's the one thing that I've self-coached before. And I think the number one thing that I miss is just that interaction in the front seats of, hey, wait, which way are we going? Hey, what do you think about that pit stop that we took, and da-da-da-da, and where are we moving in a week? And just being able to talk through things with a co-pilot is so valuable. What do you think? I get a question sometimes, actually more recently, someone will say, what do you expect from me as an athlete? What do you tell people if they ask you that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I suppose what I expect from them as an athlete is that they can be themselves, I suppose. So they're comfortable around me to sort of provide their best self to training, and I suppose as well, like, to be open to sort of create a good communication line between the two and sort of build that rapport, and I suppose buy into that, and to sort of give the time that it will allow to build that rapport. That's sort of what I would expect, I suppose, from an athlete who's maybe coming on board and beginning.
You made a really good comment of having them sort of buy into what you're doing. Are there ways that you facilitate that with a new athlete, or when you maybe have an athlete come on that you can tell, oh, I'm this person's first coach. They are probably just, they don't get the relationship yet. How do you help them buy into what the plan is so that it's like they're on board with everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I suppose there's a few things that sort of need to be done. And it all comes down to sort of this conversation of what your goal is, and then sort of mapping that out. So we sort of might sit down and say, well, to achieve this goal, we need X, Y, Z. And then we sort of reverse engineer that backwards and sort of say, this is how we're going to do it. But with that in mind, you need to be able to provide the evidence of why this will actually work. You can't just say, oh, this will work because I've done it before and it worked. You need to be able to say, this is going to work because here's a study that says that this, or, you know, things like this that need to actually, that hold water, I suppose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also too, sometimes I even say, hey, some athletes this works on, others it doesn't. It's worth trying this as an aspect of your training, because I'm sure you'd agree there's no couple workouts that's going to take them from A to B. It's, you know, these different aspects are just a piece of the plan. High torque is a great one that somebody asked me about. I had a really good conversation, and this guy said, hey, I noticed you do some high torque in your training. I've been thinking about it. I haven't seen a ton of literature. I talked to somebody else. What do you think about it? And I said, listen, why would there be literature on high torque? There's not a ton that people are studying on that. A lot of people do it, and anecdotally they feel good about it. Some people, I've given it to athletes, and I don't really feel much faster doing this. I don't feel stronger as you've described. I'm like, great, then let's not do it. I don't think taking one workout and trying something is a harm. It's like they didn't get slower from doing that, but I think it's good. You kind of cross that off the list of things that work for them. And yeah, it's good. What else what are some things that maybe, I don't want to say have gone wrong, but maybe things athletes could avoid in a coach-athlete relationship, or maybe some expectations that someone has had on you that was maybe beyond the scope of a coach, or just something that's not super, like, it's not always high fives, or maybe when things go wrong for an athlete. I don't know. That's always an interesting topic that I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm happy to talk. I've written blogs about that, like when we've just taken missteps and things didn't work out. Actually, maybe that's a good one. What do you do when things don't work out?
Yeah, I suppose like that's the thing as well. And I think it's a tough position to be in sometimes as a coach, because you're meant to be the guy with all the answers and sort of have all the solutions, but it's not always the case. And sometimes you get things wrong, and you've got to get back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, this didn't work, and here's why. And like, let's build like a strategy to sort of improve and move things forward. Yeah. What sort of expand on that again? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. And I think one thing that I've encountered this the more times than not, when it's an athlete that doesn't race a lot and maybe doesn't know how hard a bike race is going to be. If you look at a file from a race and try to make that into a workout, it's almost not possible sometimes for them to go throttle themselves that hard. And so I think one thing I've tried to really instill in people is, if this race in July is really important to you, the best thing you can do is get to some other races like it beforehand, so that 3 months before, if you go get your face kicked in, you're like, whoa, wait, I'm not as fast as I thought I would. There's a little gut check there. And I just think sometimes people think a few interval sessions are going to get them to go win the local race, because now they're training and they do feel like there's a magic bullet. If I have a coach, it's like, well, dude, like you said before, I'm just in this, I'm giving you the map, the directions, I'm giving you the best advice possible. You need to go execute it. And I think that's sometimes missed in the relationship. And the onus is still on them. They're still driving the car.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the really hard things is athletes come to us generally speaking, athletes come to us because they want to get a result in a race. And sort of it's quite the opposite is to what we try and value. Is it's like you get to a race and we put the value on how well you've executed the process to get there. So it's like, it doesn't necessarily, well, it does matter how you go in the race, but it's more about like the success, or what we consider as successful is how well you've approached that race and how well, the last 12 weeks or however long it's been to lead into that has gone. We try and put big value on that. And then, the race will be the race. There's a lot of things that you can't control there, but if you've gone in there with the best process that you possibly could have, then big tick and pat on the back. And we sort of just go in there hoping that we sort of can get what we wanted out of it.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. And I don't want to give an athlete example because I found this very interesting. I had an athlete who's an older guy who's gotten into cycling late. And he said to me when he came on, I found this sport way later in life than I wish I did. So I feel like I need to do everything now in the next 3 years. He's over 60. And so he goes to this gravel race, and I guess the long story short is the expectations, the growth that I've seen, and this was sort of like a tune-up race for him. He was disappointed by his finish time. And I said to him, there's a disconnect here. Like, this is a gravel race. The conditions could be different. The field could ride the race differently. He's actually racing. He's a top 20 in his age group and relatively big race. And I said, man, let me help you with this. Last year, you were 2.5 hours behind the winner. This year, you were 1 hour and 15 minutes behind the winner. But he was caught up on just his watts and his heart rate. And so the metrics that we focus on in training, and I failed to explain more of what the goal was for the race. And so I took that. I'm like, I didn't help you see what a win would be. And so it was a really good exercise for myself of sometimes when you work with athletes at different levels, you can forget what people don't know. And so it was just really good to get in touch with that and help me be a better coach for the next time. And he said, man, I feel like an idiot looking at watts. I'm like, don't feel like an idiot. We focus on that a lot. But yeah, the race is different. You don't want to have high watts. You want to pedal really hard when it matters and coast as much as you can, conserve that energy. So yeah, it's just interesting. I like what you said about really trying to find what is the win for that day, even if it's not winning the race. Whoa, my Siri's going crazy. Sorry. Yeah, that's good. Anything else on, I think anything else on coach athlete relationship before we slide into the next one?
Look, I think like it's pretty simple. I think the things that we try and drive, and it's just like being that person that is like that an athlete is comfortable to sort of speak to about anything, and sort of can come to us in a non-judgmental space and be able to sort of have a really easy communication line. We get the best out of our athletes when they feel comfortable around us. So it's whatever that takes for that person to sort of make that happen. And I suppose we sort of encourage, like we don't see issue with failure as well. I suppose that's probably something else worth touching on is like whether that's sort of us making a mistake, which was sort of touched on earlier, and then growing from that, like, or an athlete not quite getting the result they want. So I suppose like sort of always say like we're in the business of growing and getting better. So it's about always like failing forward and like trying to get a little bit better every time as well.
100% agree with that. Failing forward, I like that.
Yeah.
Because it's not really, yeah, you can fail a workout, but you're going to learn something from that. There's something that we can pull from that, and it might not be the best watts, but we got some knowledge from what's going on and where the training's going, and and maybe we made the session too hard. I've definitely done that before.
Yeah.
Trying to push the envelope with somebody and it wasn't the day that their body wanted to push. And it's like, oh, you tried that 2 weeks later and you crushed it. We just timed it wrong.
Yep.
So yeah, really good point. Let's talk about testing, especially since you guys have a full in real life setup down there. Let's talk about testing, I guess, first with local athletes that you have there. And then we could talk about testing with people that you work with more just online. Like I would say more athletes than not, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
would be online and maybe just a handful in person, or tell me if I'm wrong on that aspect.
Yeah, we sort of are pretty lucky, I suppose, because we're so close to Melbourne, which is got a massive cycling hub. So we've probably, like you're correct, we've got a few athletes that are sort of online and that kind of thing. But we do have a pretty solid hub of cyclists, or actually just endurance athletes, really, sort of scopes out to triathlon as well these days, sort of in Melbourne and the Peninsula. We get a fair bit of sort of face-to-face testing too, which has been really cool to sort of cut our teeth in the last sort of 6 months.
Yeah. Cool. So what type, you're doing lactate testing, or I know in emails you had mentioned we usually stay clear of just like a single interval type battery for testing. Yeah, talk about that real quick.
Yeah, I suppose it's been a bit of a journey of just like trying to learn the best testing for me ever since I sort of like come out of uni. And I'll touch on the typical sort of 20-minute FTP test because it was all I absolutely frothed it, I suppose, straight out of uni. I thought it was sort of the end all be all and just loved it. I was just like, this is such an easy field test to run. People know how to ride hard for 20 minutes, just like very simple. But I suppose the more you dig in, and I was sort of anecdotally, I was sort of had a wide variety of athletes at different abilities. I suppose the training zones that you get out of it sort of just didn't quite mesh across the board. So I was like, well, why is that? Why can one athlete ride zone 2 and the other athlete struggles? Or why is a threshold workout so much harder for someone than it is another person? And I suppose it comes down, well, it does. It comes down to how we're defining that or like where we're getting that result from. So a 20-minute test where we sort of saw it fail was that it doesn't really draw a person's physiology out. It just sort of tells us what it tells us is that what it tells us, is how many watts they can do for 20 minutes, and that's it.
Right.
And then you've got to estimate how much more watts they would lose before, like to get to an hour, or where their MLSS sort of sits in relation to that. Looking in a few studies, it can be as low as 88%, and then some people it's all the way up to 95%. So huge variance in where threshold sits in relation to that. So that took us all the way to here, where we're doing a full test battery across the board with like a glycolytic test, a step test for lactates, and then a shorter step test for VO2. So we just get a full scope of someone's physiology and sort of paint a broader picture of who they are as a person, physiologically speaking.
What type of duration is it for the glycolytic test?
Yep. So the glycolytic test, it's been a bit of like a test and trial kind of test, because there's been a bit of how long do we have to wait for them to get to a resting level, and then sort of like that passive recovery pre-sprint, and then we do like a 20-second maximal sprint to get, I suppose, their maximal lactate levels off that. And then taking several sort of pricks, some lactate samples for 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6 minutes after the test until they sort of reach their ceiling and it drops off.
When you say resting level, what is that? Is there a definition of like what the resting level is, or are you looking at heart rate, or you're actually looking at other lactate levels back to a certain millimolar?
Yeah, so we're just trying to get it around obviously there's a bit of variance in what millimolar it's going to be from person to person, but we're trying to get it as close to like 1 as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are some ranges? I actually don't have any idea the answer to this, of 20-second sprint, then back down to 1. What types of like time durations do you see athletes? How long does it usually take? What would be fast and what would be really slow?
Fast would be, fast would be in the people that we've tested, I suppose, would be like 10 minutes or maybe even 15, and slow would be all the way up to 30.
Wow.
Yeah, very long time. So I suppose that's where we've sort of been trialing when to place that test and that kind of thing in relation to all the other test batteries that we run on top of it. So yeah, it's been an interesting one.
And then do they do multiple of these tests? Like would they do a VO2 max and the glycolytic the same day, or do you have them do it differently, or what matches up well?
Yep. So it's all 3 in one day if they want to. And it takes about 2 to 2.5 hours. It's a very extensive test, and there's quite a considerable amount of recovery time between tests. Not all of them are maximal. I probably should say. I don't want to scare too many people off with the idea of it.
Like screw that! I'm not going to Pinnacle. That's brutal.
Yeah, but yeah, there's it's a pretty extensive test, I suppose. Yeah.
I've actually never been in a lab to get tested, so if I come down to this thing, I might be hitting you guys up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be cool. But it's yeah, I would. Oh, so I guess with the variance that from those studies, I think I've seen some of the ones that you're talking about with 88 to 95%. and if you're using 20-minute test, what do you ever look at after someone takes a test in your lab and maybe you go in and you say, okay, what would I have done? What would I have assigned as their FTP or their VO2 max or whatever you were testing for had I not had this test, and tried to match those up? Like just seeing, like double check the lab versus what you would have done if you didn't have the lab, but you know you have the lab answers. Like when you go back and look, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like I
for
would just
sure.
be curious how that actually, is there a good, like, can you get close enough, or have you ever noticed like, whoa, I would have been way off with this person?
Yeah, I suppose, and it's quite upsetting for a fair few of the athletes. We generally find MLSS sits quite a bit lower than considerably lower than what people would get with a 20-minute minus 5% kind of tests. There's probably only a very, very small handful of people that 20-minute test would be sufficient for. But yeah, generally speaking, and I suppose the newer they are to the sport, or the less aerobically sort of talented is the wrong word, but I suppose that kind of thing, the less they are of that, the less likely that 20-minute test is going to work, I suppose.
Definitely. Yeah, that's my biggest. I'm way more anaerobic than I wish I naturally was, and so that definitely contributes to it. So in late 2000s, no hate on my first coach, love you, Jason, but we probably had my threshold too high.
Yeah.
It was just, that was still back when, if you look at like training and racing with the power meter, look at the histogram of watts and where it like falls off, pick the bucket beforehand, and they didn't talk at all about anaerobic contribution or aerobic contribution to that number. So we were probably a smidge high, but made me feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's super tough to sort of, these people have come in and done like this massive test, and it's like a really big important. They're getting lactates done and VO2, like the mask up and everything. They sort of get the results back. It's like, oh, if I drop my FTP 20 watts or something, it's like, it's a bit upsetting, but the outcomes, I suppose, is what we're like. You get really good outcomes from it. So that's.
I think one thing that I try to remind myself of is I'm coming back from an injury, and so threshold is lower, and there are rides where I'm thinking, oh, I'm just going to go crush this climb, and I'm going to come back and WKO is going to increase my MFTP, and it doesn't happen, and it's easy, I think, for athletes to get sad when the numbers aren't where they want to be. But I always try to tell them, this is why you train. All that stuff that you accomplished before you had this injury or before you took this break, you got there because you worked hard and you did the work. And that's why you were beating people in your local group or whatever. There's no hiding in endurance sports. You have to go and ride and work. And I think as long as people can embrace that journey of, man, I know I was there before. You can get back there and you can go beyond that. But you need to be patient and put the time in. It's ringing so loudly in my ear because it's a conversation I'm having with myself over the past few weeks. It's like, just be patient. So
yeah, it's just problem solving, really. And I suppose testing it's how you go in a test doesn't matter. It just sort of creates the beginning of a solution for a problem, really. So it's just like, I want to get to this point, and here's the test, and it sort of gives us an outline of where we need to head. That's all it is. It's not about being unreal. It's just about understanding yourself, really.
Understand the self. I love that. What do you do with somebody that hits you up from outside of Australia? They want to work together. You'd mentioned Insight and email or WKO or just Training Peaks, or what are some of the softwares that you might utilize for that method for someone who can't see you in person?
Yeah. So I suppose the main thing we want to do is we still want to map someone's physiology. So we still want to be able to get a testing battery that has several different intensity or duration ranges, I suppose. Insight is incredible for that, and it can still provide you with like a metabolic sort of profile of the athlete, and has some pretty powerful sort of tools within that profile. Things like lack of pyruvate charts and that kind of thing are really, really handy for interval creation. I've even used it to sort of make time trial pacing strategies and that kind of things. That can be really cool. WKO5 is really awesome. I find that it's like the ease of use for it, and I suppose being able to like consistently update it without sort of too much effort on testing is what I find to be really beneficial with that. You've sort of just got to keep on top of a few maximal efforts across a few durations just to keep topping it up, I suppose, across like the 90-day block that it sort of creates that power duration curve off. And as long as you're doing that, it's a really pretty solid model as well.
What do you, for talking about those gaps in the power duration curve, to keep the efforts in the model, do you use specific durations for each physiological zone, or do you just look at what's most lacking in the curve?
Yeah, I suppose it probably comes a little bit down to knowing the athlete a bit. If you've been doing a whole heap of threshold work and you've been doing quite a bit of intense work around that, you almost can avoid doing a test, quote unquote test for that duration. You might just say, oh, just do like a short anaerobic effort just to top that up to see where we stand on that model. So it might just be the case of like a 1 or a 3 minute effort kind of thing, just to sort of get that FRC topped up on that side.
The 1 minute effort, so many people never do a max 1 minute. That's the first thing when we do a lot of just overviews for athletes to help them out, point them in the right direction, whether they're working with us or not. And there are so many times there's just this mega dip at 1 minute. Have you ever gone max? Because I'm curious if this is actually your FRC or not. And a minute sucks. A minute max, I hate that. And I just love different athletes. One of my best friends, Patrick, was like, dude, it's only a minute. I'm like, but it's terrible. I would rather do a 15-minute effort than a minute.
You need to find a song that the bass drops at about 30 seconds into that interval, so you can sort of just get your way through that last part of the session of the interval, because otherwise they are tough. I did one a little while ago, and it wrecked me for the rest of the session. They're so tough.
Shredded. Yeah. I'm thinking through some thoughts. I actually don't listen to music at all though when I ride, so no bass drop. I'll have to like mentally hear that song.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, have you ever used Golden Cheetah?
I haven't used Golden Cheetah, but I'm intrigued about it. I sort of, you jump on a webinar here and there and someone throws a bit of Golden Cheetah around, and yeah, I haven't used it at all, so I can't speak on behalf of it, but yeah, interesting
I was
platform.
just curious. It was what my first coach. So in 2009, I was emailing files to him. He wasn't on Training Peaks yet. I didn't even know Training Peaks existed. So I used Golden Cheetah with athletes. I started coaching in 2010. And I think maybe the first 4 or 5 years, people were just emailing me files and we were uploading them. It was very old school. Yeah. And then finally I realized there was a way better way to be doing this. I was just doing it on the side for 5 or 6 people, and it was manageable, but not with a full athlete load. But yeah, it was very user friendly. I haven't seen it in years. I would be curious to go back. The one thing that they did have that for some reason, this is in forums, WKO can't get right. It's hey, go into this file and find the best 5-second efforts or whatever duration you want. Find the best 5 of them from this ride, or it was really good at finding efforts that they have preset ones, but you can't select the number of them. And I know one thing WKO says is they don't find a lot of value in that because they only wanted to highlight like maximal efforts. But there were times when it was, hey, this crit where it's always about an 8-second blast up this little pop or whatever, like how many watts did you do in 2019 over and over when you won? Or you could just get really oddly granular on some files, which maybe is not a great thing to do, but there were some cool things in there that this makes me kind of want to go down this again.
That's cool. I mean, if you look back at that crit sort of concept and you think about like sprint repeatability, and you can like look at the top 10, 20 5-second sprints, like that's a very powerful tool, I think.
Yeah. I'm sure I would be shocked if they got rid of that, but it was very easy to use. There's another one that I tried to download, Chapeau Labs, just because it looks cool. I think Phil Guyman uses that, and I'm sure he's probably sponsored by them in some way, but just looked pretty, and I had problems downloading it, and I couldn't get it to work. I'm sure that was me not talking smack on the product, but I never got around. And I was like, yeah, this is whatever. But okay. Cool. That's awesome. Good insights on testing, WKO inside the lab. What about load monitoring?
Yeah. So it's a really tricky sort of aspect of coaching at the moment because it's not something that's like hard and fast, well known. And it's not like, here's the scientific literature and it says this exactly, so let's just do this. There's so many different sort of running elements to it. And I suppose there's the one thing that I suppose is really critical for it, especially when you're using a model like TSS, is that you have to have that master metric, which is generally FTP, that has to be tied really nicely to like an individual, like physiological characteristic of yours. So it can't be FTP thereabouts. It needs to be like MLSS, it needs to be pretty bang on. So you sort of, that model's accurate. And then there's this whole different, I suppose there's a fair few limitations with just using that alone that need to be just understood, I suppose. And I suppose a little bit, they're just like red flags, I guess. Things like, we talk about things like fractional utilization, where threshold sits in relation to VO2 max. If that's different between rider to rider, TSS is going to be different between rider to rider for the exact same workout. Things like this. It therefore needs to be a bit more personalized. And yeah, I suppose it's not as clear cut as what it can sort of be thought of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. In the fact that, a 2-hour endurance ride could be a very similar TSS as a 1-hour time trial. Two very different efforts, two very different ways to get to 100 TSS. And the thing that I think is tricky is that with cycling being so focused on metrics these days, like you mentioned before, you did this 1 minute max and wrecked you.
Yep.
There are some athletes that can go do 40-20s and they're like, oh man, I love that workout. Other athletes are in sheer terror. It totally murders them, but they might have very similar TSS. Like they're walking away from it so differently. And so I've always tried to talk an athlete through, look at the week and actually look at the workouts objectively as a human. What was really hard? What was really easy? Are we doing too much hard? Are we doing too much easy? How does this then match up with the chronic training load? And I had a conversation with a guy on the podcast, Cody Stevenson, about how they call it fitness, which he explained to me that fitness is technically, the technical definition is chronic training load, but that when an athlete is tapering for an event, and I don't do very long tapers, but I've heard people talking of, I'm tapering and now my fitness is tanking. And I'm thinking they're tying everything to this one number. Like it's psyching them out when really they're sharpening the sword and shedding all this fatigue, and they're thinking that they're getting worse. So yeah,
it's really tough too. Yeah, with that side of things, I generally find that the higher that CTL number goes, the more that you do like a taper, that it just completely skews it. Like if you were an athlete that got really high CTL and you decide to do like a taper week, how hard is that taper week to be able to maintain, quote unquote, maintain your fitness CTL? It's still, in my opinion, a too hard of a week. So if you deload or you taper into an event and you've got a high CTL, like just sort of expect to see that come down. And I think it does go a little bit out of whack. It only works for certain ranges, I suppose.
It gets super out of whack. And I should revisit this because I can't remember the exact example, but I had posted a video, maybe talking about this because it was a perfect case of the chronic training load, training stress balance, looking like I should be fresh and ready to go. And I was absolutely wrecked. I was actually coming off of like 4 weeks of training. I usually do 3 on, but I had a short little Omnium 3-day race in Georgia. And it's just the way it all came together. The numbers looked great. If I was doing my training off of this, it looks like, oh, you're ready to go. And I was ready for a rest week. And so I think just that human element is so crucial. And this is actually something we didn't talk about, but I am a huge fan of AI, and I'm super pumped for when AI can help in planning, if that. The one people have obviously asked me, what do you think about different AI platforms out there? And I just said there's so many variables that they're not, I'm not saying they're missing, that they're doing it wrong, that we can't capture yet as variables coming into a training model to then tell us what to do. Have you thought about how could AI help us coach people better? Because I think the communication is obviously that's the number one thing I get from coaching. So I don't know if I would ever be able to use just a computer program to say I'm getting the best coaching from it. But what have you thought about how AI might be able to help out in this process?
Not a great deal, I suppose. The one thing that I think AI, and it's sort of, I suppose there's a few like companies that are already sort of starting to go down this space of using it for load monitoring. You see like Whoop and that kind of thing sort of have that AI coach and that sort of thing tied in with them. So it's more just like, oh, your strain is this for the day, so like here's a suggestion of what you should do, sort of thing. So it's sort of giving ideas about how to monitor load around that. But I think there's a bit more to go in that space before it becomes a bit more, until it becomes something that I'd be confident to use at least. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious. There's one that I won't name it because I don't want them to think I'm smack talking them, but I think I can download this training app and that has AI, and I might give it a try just to see. I'm curious what it would recommend to me. And I had a conversation with a nutritionist, dietitian, I guess maybe similar thing, but we were just talking about Whoop. I'm not a fan of Whoop for athletes. I've used one and it was just wildly off, telling me I was great when I wasn't. And most things tell me I'm overtraining all the time, which could be true, but yeah, it's that actually is a whole other thing of to understanding the athlete. Like I'm a cyclist before a bike racer. So if I'm riding a little bit too much, I'm cool with that because I'm 42 and what am I like? I'm racing for fun. So yeah, that's a whole other wormhole, but yeah, that's good. I think my comment on load monitoring would just be similar to what you said, something along the lines of the meaning of really understand the athlete. What's their goal? Not only event wise, but why are they riding a bike?
Yep.
I've got an athlete that loves going freaking long, and we're going to work those in, even if he knows, hey, you might not be as good for the crit 3 days after that Sunday banger that you're doing. You want to go do these weekday crits also. We can't do everything. I got it. Cool. I'm good with that. And another athlete who loves lifting in the gym. I said, you want to lift 3 to 4 times a week. It would be great if you did 1 to 2 and spent that other hour riding, but they don't want to do that. And we've chatted about it, and we're going to manage that load in the way that, makes them happy though. So I think, yeah, the metrics sometimes just take away, God, what's the guy's name? My gosh, he had just made a comment on Rouleur magazine, has a crazy hair, rode for EF. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. He has a brother. They do thereabouts.
The Mortons, Lockie and Angus Morton.
Yeah. What's the first guy's name?
Lockie.
Lachlan Morton. And he had said, man, there's so many gizmos and all these things now that if I just started cycling, I feel like I would need all these things to do the sport. And that's one reason he's not loving the gravel scene. If you're on Instagram, go check out Rouleur Magazine's it's probably their last post. I just saw it the other day, and I just thought it was really interesting. There's just so much stuff now that I don't know. I feel like I've said this in probably like 5 or 6 videos. I feel like I'm getting to the age where like back in my day, but I had a cat eye. It was, it told me my mileage based on what the speed and revolution of my wheel was. There was maybe there were Garmin's then. I actually don't know that in 2008. But I sure as hell didn't have one. And, I just think we come in now and everybody's got a power meter and everybody has this and that. And we're tripping over dollars to pick up a couple quarters. And it's like, go ride the bike, get the basics down. But I digress.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting though, like you sort of have all these fancy models and that kind of thing for training load, and they all work reasonably well, but then it still comes back down to the conversation of how do you feel right now, and do we need to adapt to the strategy, I suppose, or the training plan.
So let me ask you that. What about RPE and intervals? Do you ever do sessions by that, or maybe any RPE stuff to tap into those feelings?
To a certain extent. So I suppose there's technically, I guess it's RPE where you do max sessions because it's just like RPE as hard as you can go, and there will be a decrease in power output across the span of the intervals because you're going to fatigue, but they should feel maximal. But then we have a type of endurance ride. We call it just auto-regulation endurance ride. So it's just like a very broad range of what's that are sitting there, but it's more just the description's more just says if you feel good, ride hard. If you feel a bit fatigued, just ride it easy and get the duration in. And it's just as simple as that, and that's all it has to be.
I like that. I think that's important. I think it's a good skill to have athletes tap into, of understanding. It took me a while to understand that if I wasn't, when I started riding and I heard about endurance, I assumed I wanted to aim for 75% because that was the top level. Like, this is, I'm 65 to 70. Let's go to the top. And of course, that's not always the answer. And that's some people will say that's never the answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that. Some days you just want to go and you're just rolling.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about Sarah G. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please go.
Yeah, no, I was going to say Sarah G. You had brought her up. Let's talk about, can you give people who might not know who is Sarah G? What's her quick story?
Okay, yeah. So Sarah G, great nickname to start off with, by the way. Absolute hitter in Australia. I started coaching her back when she was riding with Holden Racing Team back in the National Road Series days. But she rides for AG Sedal now, like the Women's World Tour team, currently at the Vuelta, and sort of has had a bit of success this year, which has been so much fun, winning the Tour Down Under. And then previously she's won the Nationals road race and the Nationals time trial a couple of times, and been to the Olympics, been an absolute ride. For those who don't know her, I strongly suggest check it out because she's very exciting to watch race and pretty cool person.
That's awesome. So what are some of you had talked about some hurdles that she had to overcome after Nationals TT, and maybe what are some like prep things or things that the listeners might find interesting to hear from a World Tour athlete that you've been able to see as her coach?
Yeah, cool. So I suppose just to touch on the Nationals side of things, it was a whole summer leading into like the time trial. It was like obviously she won the Tour Down Under, but the primary goal of that summer was to win the time trial, try and get selected for Olympics. And just sort of, AG obviously have been incredible in giving her a contract. This is her first year with them. So we just wanted to hit the ground running, and, time trials are very controllable. We've won it twice before. So let's just have another crack and try and get a third. And did just a bucket load of time trial work the 3 months leading into it. A lot of prep on that bike, sort of preparing it as well. Got to race day, 40 seconds to go, gears stopped working. It's just cut out. That's it. And she rides the time trial on her road bike. And of course, when you've got people as talented as Grace Brown and Brodie Chapman and Georgie Howe, the list goes on of very, very good female time trialists in Australia, you're not going to get near it on a road bike. So incredibly tough to go through. Obviously, it was a huge goal, and it was just shattering, obviously for Sarah and even myself. It was a lot of work going into it to sort of just not even get a chance of really genuinely competing at it. But it was one of those tough things. I suppose you sort of go back to what we talked about earlier in the poddy, that we value, what we place value on is not the results, and it's the process. The process leading into that was hugely successful, and it was just like a big tick. Like we got so strong across that, and we really nailed sessions and the communication to adjust training load. And it was just a really good block of training. So then it was like, tick, it's actually a success, although the day didn't go to plan. The next day, massive brew ride, sit at a cafe, reset, and sort of just like get into mode for TDU and Nationals road race. Yeah.
That's a huge bummer to overcome mentally. I mean, just like you said, she didn't even get the opportunity to win or lose, just didn't get the opportunity. And that stinks. I hate to hear that.
Yeah.
When you were talking about TT work in those final, and I think you said 3 months beforehand, what are some of the key sessions? I think it's a very interesting point that you brought up, like the TT bike work, doing stuff on the actual bike that you're going to be racing on, which I think is overlooked by people that want to do well in time trials sometimes. But what were some of the key actual fitness type sessions that you honed in on? Yeah,
cool. So I suppose time trialing, like it's all about CDA to power. Like it's about how well you can hold that position and how much power you can put out across the race. And the Nationals, well, it's changed, it's moving next year, but the Ballarat Nationals time trial course is really diverse. Like it's got a bit of a technical section, it's got downhill, uphill, and some flats. So it's got a bit of everything. So you've got to be pretty prepared to be able to go into the red, recover at intensity, and sort of all do it whilst very aerodynamic and quite aggressive in the positions. The workouts are generally, obviously doing a lot of threshold work and sort of trying to bump that number up, but it's a lot about lactate clearance and sort of bumping that VO2 up as well and that kind of thing.
I like what you're saying. So when you get even more granular, when you're talking about threshold work, are you over-unders type guy for certain athletes? Do you have athletes ride at constant power? Some people are sort of all over on what they think moves the needle. I'd be curious what your thoughts are.
I think that they both move the needle. So it's like the lactate clearance side of things. Like there's, it's how much lactate you produce versus how much you can get rid of it. So and it's like where that point meets that's steady is where your threshold is, right? And I think the steady state works really well in just being able to just tolerate that workload for a consistent amount of time. But then you also need to be able to have the capacity to sort of oxidize built up lactate and sort of move it and shuttle it around. That over-under kind of work, we sort of sometimes do like longer over-unders. So you might be even doing like an over section of like 1 to 2 minutes with an under of 1 minute, that kind of thing as well, where it's still quite intense on the under. I have big ratings of that. And especially with that TT course, having like a lot of work where you're going to go well up above threshold and then have to clear it. It's really important.
Yeah, cool. I think that can be... Yeah, no, I'm going to leave it at that. That's awesome. What else about Sarah maybe that has been interesting or intriguing as she's moved along? So is she at the Vuelta now, you said?
Yeah, at the Vuelta now. She's probably, what time are we? She's probably actually about to start racing. Yeah, so first mountain stage tonight, so hopefully we see some fireworks. I'm looking forward to that. What was the question again? Sorry.
No, so I don't know her that well. So what's her role on the team going into the Vuelta?
Yeah, so very good climber and obviously very good time trialist. So she's AG's like GC rider for the tour.
Okay, cool.
And I suppose alongside, obviously, Ashley Moorman-Passio, unfortunately, was sick this tour, but she's sort of generally alongside Ashley, or Ashley's sort of the leader. Sort of that GC climber type rider.
Very cool. That'll be exciting to watch. The women's racing is amazing. We haven't posted yet. Marta Cavalli was on, and so I was catching up on some of the classics that she won a few years ago, and I'm excited that I think it was Eurosport that had the clips. They've been doing a lot of end of the race, like last 20K, last 10K, last 5K that have been on my YouTube feed. And I've been loving that they've been doing a really good job with the women's racing as well, because unless I wasn't looking in the right places, I never was tapped into a lot of women's pro racing. There just wasn't the footage shown. And it seems like now, and I'm sure there'll be some women, they'll be like, what are you talking about? There's way less women's footage. But I've just seen so much more, and their racing is ferocious. So I always forget that the Vuelta is early for them. And then, so when is the Giro? Yeah,
so it's the Giro's, I'll get it wrong, but it's about 9 weeks after the Vuelta. It goes Vuelta Giro Tour this year. Yeah, okay. And I feel like that might be different because the Olympics is on during the tour, so it's the tour sort of moved around a little bit this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was looking back at Marta's results and the timeline. Okay, that makes sense now. Okay, cool. Anything else? This was awesome, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and chat. And anything else that we should hit on before, any final words for the listeners?
No, I think it's been a pretty good chat, mate. Yeah. No, I don't have much more to add, I don't think.
We'll get your website in the show notes so people down under that want to swing through, hit up Pinnacle, hit up Dylan, post the IG, definitely give them a follow. And if anyone's going to Grand Fondo Worlds in 2025, hit us up. Maybe we'll get a group ride going or something and Good luck with everybody's training and racing. We'll talk to you soon.